Please give it up for Bria. We need to have like a Bria, you got some fans in the crowd. I love it. All right. I hear them through like outside of my headphones.
Thank you so much. Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. All right, let's get started. So my name is Bria, and I'm the CTO of Honeybee Games. We make games about bubble tea, and our games have been played by over 2 million people around the world. So in February 2020, I received some kind of bad news. I was a software engineer at Google, and I was looking to become a developer advocate. But I had learned that I had passed the interview, but I heard the exact words that I was afraid of hearing. No headcount. That meant that my beautiful dreams that I had of joining this team and traveling the world for this role came crashing down. And I knew that I wasn't growing or being challenged enough in my current role, so I had to do what most engineers would in my position. I had to find a job outside of my current company. But since I wanted more of a challenge, I thought maybe like a well-funded startup would be a right move. So I remember I set up a bunch of calls, and I remember sitting on the phone and with the VP of engineering of a startup that had just raised a ton of money, and I asked her what problem they were solving. Because if it's a startup, I should probably be somewhat interested in the subject. And then she said, bookkeeping. It was in that exact conversation that I realized that I don't want to use my technical skills anymore for things that I don't care about. I wanted to be excited about my work again. I wanted to have joy. I wanted to have fun. And what did I do to have fun outside of my current role or outside of work? I would get food with my friends, or I'd play video games. It was then that I decided that it was time to make my very first game. But I had no idea how or where to start. What would the game even be about? What could I realistically do if I know absolutely nothing about game development? Can any of the skills that I have transfer over to making a game? I asked myself all of these questions, and I'm going to be answering them today in my talk about how I made my first mobile game while working a full-time job and how you can do it too. So we're gonna start with where to start with your idea, your tech options for your first game, planning your game, and the schedule to execute it. Today I'm gonna be talking about mobile games specifically because it's what I know, it's what I like to play, and it's a game console that basically everyone has, so they can beta test it, like your friends and family can beta test it and try it for you. If you're not interested in mobile, this talk is still relevant, but launching is a little bit different. So the first question that I first had to answer was, what would the game be about? The first step in making games is finding games that you like, not games that you think other people will play or that they'll be interested or that will do well. What do you like to play? Personally, I love food games. Sorry. The clicker's not working. Sorry, AV team, the clicker's not working. There it goes. Okay. I love food games, and I like to play a lot of games like Zelda and Animal Crossing, those kinds of games, but there's something about food games that speak to me. I get a lot of inspiration from games I played as a kid, so like online Flash games. So choose a few inspiration games, and this is a step that you're gonna come back to constantly. Next is theme. It's probably not a good idea to copy a game exactly, but most games are actually a copy of another game, but with a twist. And trust me, it's fine, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. A few things to think about when picking a theme are, what foods do you like? What do you like to do with your friends? Is there an animal or a mythical creature that you really like? A favorite show or movie? A couple ideas could be basketball, unicorns. There's like a robot unicorn in the corner. cats, and pizza. As you can probably guess, I chose to make my first game about bubble tea. It's fun to drink and it's fun to look at. So you combine your theme with your inspiration game, and then you have a kind of a concept for a first game. Another example is one of my friends likes what are called endless runner games, like Temple Run and Subway Surfers, but he also loved playing hockey with his friends and watching hockey. So he made a hockey version of an endless runner game with the same mechanics as seen on the right. Once you have your theme and some general inspiration of what you like to play in mind, you have to choose the game engine that you're going to use. And in order to choose which engine, you have to first understand what you want to do and what you can do. Do you want to learn a new technology? Or are you looking to utilize a framework that you already know? Are you looking to utilize your software engineering skills? Are you familiar with object-oriented languages? These are all important to keep in mind when choosing your engine, because you could also not choose an engine at all. If you're already familiar with mobile development frameworks like native iOS, native Android, React Native, Flutter, all of the above, you can make a text-based role-playing game pretty easily. You can do more complex stuff in a mobile development framework, but I have done it, and I will say don't do that. Use an engine if you want to do anything a little bit more complicated than a text-based game. But here's some examples of 3 really, really popular multi-million-dollar games that were just text, and they're pretty simple. You click something, and then something happens. Pretty straightforward. Another option to consider is RenPy. This is for the folks that want a story and art-heavy experience with not that much coding. Next is Buildbox. Buildbox is great for people who want to do some dragging and dropping and a little bit of coding, and I've seen Buildbox do endless runner games pretty well. Next is Unity. Unity is what most games that you see on the App Store and Play Store use. You could do pretty simple 2D stuff, you can do pretty simple 3D stuff, all the way to very complex 2D and 3D games. And this is probably the best option if you're already familiar with an object-oriented language and you might want to consider gaming as a long-term career. Last up is Godot. I've personally never used Godot, but my friends that have say that it's really easy to use, really easy to learn, and it's great for beginners. But when I went through this process, I decided that I was going to use Unity. I've tried a lot of these here, but most important thing is to not get caught up in analysis paralysis. They're all good options. Just choose one and go for it. So by now, you should have a couple inspiration games, a theme, and a game engine. I chose Unity because I thought I might want to do it as a career, so I had to learn how to make a game with that in mind. But I had the idea of mixing the subject of bubble tea with the game for a long time, and I had built up this idea in my mind of this dream game. I wanted it to literally feel like I was behind a barista station, mixing and serving teas and making boba and all that stuff and handing it to customers. But that sounds really hard, and I don't even know how I'd find a tutorial for that. I can't. I had to either figure out how to fit this grand idea into hundreds of smaller chunks or make a smaller game, make a building block. The biggest lesson here was don't make your dream game as your first game. Maybe make a part that can build towards that, but do not make your dream game as your first game. So I needed to find something smaller and in my wheelhouse, so I thought harder about the games I like to play, and this is where you have to go back to the inspiration games and choose a very, very simple reference game. This is the Lilo and Stitch sandwich stacker game. It's very simple and very fun, and I used to play it a lot. And I figured I could make it very easy to make a drink instead of a sandwich. So you'll apply your theme to some inspiration games and then figure out which one feels the most interesting to you. This is going to be very important because when it starts to get challenging, you'll need to be interested. You have to be really interested in it to get over those hurdles. The next step is to write all the features that you want. Let the creativity flow, play some music and just let it flow through you. You're probably way more creative than you think. And if you can't draw for art inspiration or art style, you can find inspiration in movies, shows, comics, or other games. But just let your imagination wander and think about everything. Look at your reference game and think about what's missing. The next step is to cut almost everything. So rank each of the features that you just wrote down and rank them in order of importance. You can use notes or sheets. I personally like to use sheets, spreadsheets, and rank them in order of importance. And then you're gonna ask yourself, will the game be functional at all without this? Just functional. If people can still use the game without that feature, then you can cut it. And because I'm talking about mobile game development here, you can always add it later. So once you have this set of very few things you have to do, it's time to start finding tutorials. By now you've picked your game engine, the language that you're going to use, the subject of the game, some reference material, and with this you should be able to start building your bookmark folder or watch list on YouTube of tutorials to use. Try to match the very specific mechanic from the game to a tutorial. So I had to find tutorials where things were dropping and then you're catching things. This is the tutorial that I used. There's bowling balls that fall and you have to catch them in a hat. Pretty simple. I suggest watching the tutorials in full first without doing anything just to see if it can apply. A tip that I learned along the way is if you don't have that much time to actually work on this side project during your work week, you can probably set aside an hour here or there just to watch tutorials and start building your tutorial list. But it usually takes a few watches to sink in anyways. But that brings me to schedule. Whew. Okay, so this is where I actually had to start making the game. I had the reference YouTube tutorials, the theme of bubble tea, and the idea that I wanted to make a game that had ingredients falling from the top of the screen. So I started with allowing myself one full day, one full Saturday to get acclimated. And it was winter in New York City, so I didn't have that much to do outside anyways. And I did not have an ideal setup either. I had to go pull my bed out of the wall, and the end of my bed touched my kitchen counter, so I had to put a pillow at the end of my bed and use that as a desk chair and use my kitchen counter as my workstation. And I had an older MacBook too, so it took a minute to get the dev environment going. But once it was up, I had so much fun. It was hard to pull myself away from my computer. I had been working on large-scale back-end migrations for Google Docs for a long time, so I had gone a while without being able to see what I had done. With games, I could see what I was learning in real time. I started with the bowling ball falling from the top of the screen and changed it to boba. I changed the hat to a cup, and I learned what it meant to register that one thing had just hit another. So after my first day, I felt like my vision for this game was possible, but I had only given myself that one day. I needed to figure out how to do it with my very busy schedule. So I say, try to launch your game in no longer than 3 months. That's 12 weeks. But I said launch your game, not finish it. And I'll get to why in a moment. But try to fit in maybe 8 to 10 hours per week. That may be one full day on the weekend, or both days if you're feeling ambitious, or it could be a few hours 2 days a week. But you're gonna wanna block off at least 3 hours each time that you work, because context switching is no good when you're learning. As you go along, rescope, see if there's anything that you can probably leave out and add later, because remember, you can always add it later. They expect you to, your users expect you to. But here's an example of a potential schedule. You do dev time on the weekends and non-dev tasks on the weekdays. Some things you can do, like I mentioned, finding tutorials, but also building an email list. Build a list of potential users or beta testers. You can do this with a website builder like Wix or Squarespace, or if you want to go even simpler, just do a Google form. Another thing you can do, I also wanted to just mention that Email is the best way to keep track of your users. They have Discord and all these different things, but as a person with a company that does this regularly, email is still your best and most reliable option. And you can also use your weekdays to hire and manage artists. So this can be really fun. My first game, Milk Tea Mania, is what I ended up calling it. I did the assets myself, but it made the process take way more time. And I had to use my dev time to make these assets. And I'm not a formally trained graphic designer, so I made mistakes like this. I don't know if you can see it, but this is a boba pearl that I made. I think it looks pretty good. But when I wanted to make a nice falling animation, it looked like this. Not too appetizing when you're trying to make a game about food. This could have been better supplemented by having an artist make some assets for me. I recommend Fiverr for your first game. It's relatively cheap, and there's a lot of really great artists on there, and they're pretty good at following instructions, and you don't need that many assets anyways for a first game. And you can manage the back and forth during your work week and not during your dev time, because your dev time should be focused. If you love drawing and art and that's your favorite part, by all means, enjoy the process. This is supposed to be fun. Here's some examples of assets that I've gotten from Fiverr. I have not used almost all of this, but like each asset here costed maybe $15, $25, $50 at the most, but still like reasonable. But remember how I said to launch your first game in 3 months? That's for a reason. It will never be perfect, like never ever be perfect. And I said launch your game, not finish it. You'll need to find out if the game is fun before you can go any further. It will always feel like it needs more music, more levels, more characters. But how will you know if people are even getting past level 3? And nothing speaks quite like data. This is an example of what's called a funnel. I personally use Firebase Analytics and Unity Analytics to see what features people are using and how far players are getting in the game. And I'm not gonna go over how to do this. You can figure that out. And anyway, this schedule is just a recommendation and how I make sure things get done. To recap, we went over where to start with your idea, your tech options for your first game, planning your game, and the schedule to execute it. It might seem like this is too simple, but that's all you really need to get going. In my opinion, the most important part is launching and getting user feedback. If you can commit to launching a game in less than 12 weeks, you can feel accomplished and experience the joy of launching things instead of having a backlog of unfinished projects on GitHub like I did. If it takes longer than 3 months, though, that's totally fine. I took 5 months for the first game, but I held on to it for way too long. My first game, Milk Tea Mania, was far from perfect and was full of bugs, but it did fine for what it was supposed to be. It was a building block, a stepping stone. It's the game on the left. But it helped me realize that, yes, I do want to pursue a career in gaming. And today, the code from Milk Tea Mania is a building block of my game Boba Story, seen in middle and right. That is my most popular game. And Boba Story isn't my dream game either, but it'll be a building block toward my next game. Thank you.
All right, give it up for Bria.
If y'all have any questions, feel free to send me a message or stop me somewhere.